very interesting. And those men looked at me like they wanted to tear my head off. They were there just like the ancient Jews, in a good way, but this was a bad way, wanted to go to the temple and have the priest go beyond the veil to relieve them of their sins, to have the blood pass over them, so that the judgment, the angel of death, wouldn't get them. That was what I was seeing, and they even talked about Faust. It was a mix of Faust, Canaanite, Babylonian, Druidic magic, Men in Power is a political retrospective written by the former German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt. He says, we have our own groves we do rituals in. I have blow-ups of the book and the film. The book's back there on the bookshelf. In fact, guys, I think it's back on that bookshelf in there in that room, in that studio. And he says, but I love the rituals at Bohemian Grove, and more gets done with the Trilateral Commission and CFR there. And then they admit in mainstream news it's giant gay orgies, homosexual orgies. And so you need to understand it's all about rebellion against the order of things. And it leads to destruction. And I'm not here at some level of hating gay people. It's that historically, whether it's Sodom and Gomorrah or the fall of Rome or now, that is pushed at the center of it. Joel Skousen, final comments on this deal with the devil, then I want to go to some phone calls.
Well, it works by the lure of immunity. At the top, immunity against the chains of hell, and at the lower levels, immunity against earthly sins by controlling judges in Congress and other aspects of law enforcement.
As above, so below.
That's right. At various forms of control, and that's very important to have the control of the judiciary. So this system is not going away. At best, what we can do, I think, is to try to build a resistance movement, and that's why, even though I don't believe that we're powerful enough to stop them, I think that we have to educate as many people to build the remnant which God will inspire to resist. And ultimately, I think the second coming comes to stop the satanic control and to take it down. And then they will know that the promises of immunity do not hold, and that they will, in fact, experience the chains of hell. But really, it does drive them tremendously to have this promise of immunity. It's very, very effective. You're seeing it all through history, and we're watching it at this very time.
God is a just God and gives us all these blessings, our wonderful consciousness, our free will. Everything good flows out of God that created reality. Anyone who has their head screwed on halfway straight feels it, knows it, sees it. And I've had experiences that are private I won't even get into on air. It's real, folks. The enemy knows that. How could these people not know that Lucifer is the counterfeit? They believe Christ is the counterfeit. How do they not, in their very soul, know it as prima facie, Joel?
It doesn't matter if they know it or not. I mean, Satan knows what's real. He still fights against it. And that's the point. When you get a history, a backlog of sin, and one of the point I wanted to make, the reason why the gay agenda is so important to this globalist agenda is because part of the lure is to have dirt on people, to control them, to tell them, look, we've got this and this, so you're going to do what we ask you to do, or we will reveal these things. And then they get deeper into it. Once you get deep enough into it, in these kinds of sins, and they love blackmailable sins. Homosexuality used to be the ultimate blackmailable sin. It isn't as much today, but it still is significant, and they use that to cause people to say, look, this is your best choice out. It doesn't matter if you know that hell is coming. They're promising them immunity from that, and that's an illusory hope that, in fact, lures a lot of people in. It does work.
So they just do it out of fear.
Yeah, fear of the two bad choices, admitting what I'm doing is wrong and taking the consequences, or the promise, the illusory promise that somehow someone's going to give me immunity, and there I can keep going in the same direction I can do, and get rewarded along the way with wine, women, and song.
Well, there is a thrill in sin at a certain level, but then it always gets really scary down that road. Again, I'm not up here on some high horse saying, well, the fake church up there acting foolish and attacking everybody, which actually drives folks away. But clearly, aborting our children, this whole anti-human agenda, we can see where it leads. It's just, it's hellish. And it seems to me hell is almost of its own making. I know God judges us, but at the same time, to me, hell is just a place where all the bad spirits who resonate towards that go, and that's what makes it hell, is that the parasites, the vampires, don't have a God's creation to feed on. It's almost like a phantom zone that they're being sent to. I mean, what is your idea of hell from a biblical perspective?
Well, I think that there really is extreme suffering in hell. And, the reason is, it's like you didn't learn the lessons of earth through listening to conscience. And so you're going to get the extreme pain of consequences all poured onto your mind, and it tends to purge out of people. In God's own mercy, it tends to purge any desire to do those things again because they remember the pain. And that's what I think hell does from a godly standpoint, is help the people purge those evil desires because they experience the full pain. And remember, the entire concept of satanic-driven government is to exclude people from the pain of their consequences so that they aren't judged, so that they get immunity from things. You can see that God needs to give consequences and pain that we might learn, if only at the end of this world, through the chains of hell.
It's pretty heavy stuff, and whether folks believe in God and the devil or not, as a group consciousness, it is manifesting, and the world elite do follow Luciferianism. And then their minions are Satanists. It's hardcore. Chris, you're on the air with Joel Skousen. Thanks for holding. Then we'll go to John, Mario, Alex, and Ian. Go ahead.
Hey, how's it going, Mr. Skousen?
Fine, thank you.
I have a cool question. I'm a college student here in liberal California, and a lot of my colleagues, I've noticed, aren't really, that educated, unfortunately. And I'm not trying to be arrogant or anything, but the education level here is like really dumbed down. And it's ridiculous. I live over here in the midst of what's happening with Jade Helm and everything, and it's pretty scary stuff. But my question was for you is, what do you think about the whole Edward Snowden revelations and whatnot? Because my colleagues, when I told them about it, they couldn't care less. I mean, they don't even know who their governor is, let alone the vice president. So, what's your opinion on that?
Well, the Edward Snowden revelations, and I think he's sincere, by the way, I think that they're the most significant revelation because it gave the mainstream world at least a glimpse into the fact of this total awareness spying program that the government's been involved in. And Snowden didn't even know half the picture. I mean, they've been spying on everyone and everything for years, even before 9/11. It's very, very significant, and it's a good test for people. If they aren't concerned with total spying of people, it's because they've been told it's just metadata, that it isn't the content. Let me tell you, it's impossible to extract the metadata until you have the total content. They've got it all. And you have to understand the reason. The reason is eventually to take down dissidents. It can't be for terrorism because terrorism is mostly a controlled government operation. So this is a litmus test to me to see if people have a good conscience. They should be concerned. If they aren't, I don't really deal with a lot of people who don't sense that something's wrong. I only concentrate my efforts on those that are at least aware enough to sense that something's wrong.
I was about to say, Christ said, knock the dust off your feet. It's not that we don't love these people, but when they laugh at us and they show that spirit of contempt, it means they're probably too far gone. You need to move on to those that are receptive. That's where you want to plant your seeds, is in the good soil where it actually bears fruit.
Definitely. I have I bought my laptop to school one time, do a presentation and whatnot. People were asking why I had tape on my webcam. They were ridiculing me for it. And I mean, I explained to them why, because of the whole NSA thing, and I told them what was going on and everything, and they couldn't care less. They used that whole false straw man argument.
Well, sure, they think denying there's a problem controls reality. They're very childlike. Joel Skousen's our guest. Joel, can I push you on for one more segment?
Sure.
All right, worldaffairsbrief.com. Thanks for doing that. Thank you, caller. John, Mario, Alex, and others. We're going to come back and rapid fire go through your calls. So be ready with your questions or comments straight ahead. Back in just a few minutes.
Yes, my question is, I'm a black male. I speak Spanish fluently, and I just I went down and got some property down in Panama. I like Joe's expert opinion on Panama. I'm just really concerned. I love the country. I'm just concerned about China and Panama with the Panama Canal.
Well, it's a good question. You ought to be concerned. I've spent a lot of time in Central America, including Panama. It's got, perhaps the best banking ability for Americans, even despite the new shutdown of a lot of banks in Central America aren't dealing with Americans anymore, but you can get service in Panama. You've got to remember, though, that Panama is not a principled country. It'll make a deal with anybody who plans to bail them out. That's why they made their extensive deals with Red China. China is intending to take the Panama Canal, and that means occupying the country someday. What I'm telling you is that all of the expat experience about the nice, cheap, easy living in Latin America, especially Central America, won't hold up during a wartime scenario. The tourist economy will disappear. They'll be in constant deficit. I think they'll confiscate American bank accounts and perhaps American property. So I think while you still have a few years to enjoy that, you ought to make plans to come back and strategically locate in the United States. And you might reference my book on that. But
absolutely. Joel, let me ask you a question. Is there anywhere in the world you think is better than the United States?
No, not for Americans especially. Americans can blend in here. We're going to lose our liberty as a nation, in my opinion, but there'll be pockets, large pockets of resistance, especially out west, where a lot of the good people will migrate after and during war, and there'll be new majorities formed that I think will be able to resist.
I mean, the preppers are the people that see it coming. Thank you for the great call, John. And just by the source of our economy, and we'll build new little societies. Let's talk to Alex in Wisconsin. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Salutations, Joel. Alex, I have two questions. First question for Joel is, I've heard Alex answer this one, but what's at the bottom of the rabbit hole?
And you're talking about the globalist conspiracy?
Well, where does it all end with? Is it just Satanism, as Alex says, or is, where does it all get to the bottom of it,
What's the end game?
The bottom?
Well, the end game is total control without you realizing that you're under total control. In other words, sufficient crises so that people yield up their sovereignty and their free will, and keeping you in constant crisis so that you will continue to do that. But ultimately, Satan is interested in the corruption of the soul. It is a satanic agenda, and that's why he's not content only for control. He wants corruption as well. That's why he's working on Hollywood, literature, books, movies.
And you can see the acceleration. They're now in major newspapers saying pedophilia is not a big deal, and you're basically a pedophobe. I mean, they're really, there is no bottom of the pit. Thank you, caller. Appreciate that. One last call, and I'll come back to the other callers. Joel's got to go. Mario, you're our tail gunner with Joel Skousen. Go ahead.
Hi, Alex. Hi, Joel. Just want to say I'm huge fans. Me and my girlfriend were at Cal Gym. We just love the energy you brought. People are waking up. There's no question about that. Joel, for you, people are awaking, to the atrocities that our government are part of, but some are still worried about questions like conspiracies about inflatable balls in the NFL, but they don't want to believe that there's evil people in control in the government. What would you say to that?
Well, that's a big question. First of all, you've got to remember that there's a lot of phony conspiracy theories put out there specifically to discredit true conspiracies.
Cass Sunstein admitted that White House plan.
Right. I spent a lot of time debunking what I consider the false conspiracies, and they're all over the place. There's a lot of conspiracies talking about imminent nuclear war because of Ukraine. It's not going to happen. Russia isn't ready yet. And they're going to get people tired of who buy into that and run around with their like a head with their cut off, claiming that nuclear war is imminent. And when it doesn't happen, then when the real threat gets close, nobody will listen.
Well, look at how we never said martial law this summer, that it was training for that and part of a long-term conditioning. They never quoted us or linked to us. They just said, we said imminent, war, takeover this summer. So when it doesn't happen, they'll write articles and say we said that. So obviously that's their agenda.
And then even in the economy, we've had notable people from Peter Schiff to John
Williams.
Williams and Gerald Saleni for the past 3 years predicting imminent collapse, and they don't understand.